and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 259th episode, our guest is Chuck Rosenthal. Chuck Rosenthal is a writer living in Topanga Canyon, California. He is the author of Awake Forever in a Sweet Unrest, as well as 14 other novels and 5 other books. He is a romantic writer. And now on to the show.
I had my first public reading last night.
Oh, neat. How'd it go?
Went well attended. All the seats were filled.
Excellent.
So that's good. They weren't jamming in the back, but it was went well. Sold some books and Coriolis put on had to do a pretty good pre-ordering campaign, because my birthday was August 31st, so I had
happy birthday
for my birthday, and they did. So Amazon was actually kind of slow to react. They didn't really, but so I guess I sold some books. But I'm not a sales hound, so
yeah,
I don't know what really happened. It's a good book, and what happens will happens. I'm excited about this book, and that's why I'm talking to you right now.
Absolutely. Well, for people who don't know who you are, if you'd go ahead and just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Well, I'm Chuck Rosenthal, and I'm an American novelist. This is my 15th published novel. I've also published 5 other books, a memoir, and 2 books of magical essays, and wrote 2 books of sci-fi poems with the one with the artist Gronk, and who illustrated 75 different sci-fi poems, and also another book of noir poems. All the lines are taken from 1950s movies.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so it didn't write a word, but it was a long process. We just watched lots of movies and then wrote down lines and then cut them up, and then that started making poems. It was a blast, and we even made a play out of it, and we got my first standing ovation.
Neat. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
So I've done a lot of stuff. I'm interested in fantasy and sci-fi, and I'm a romantic.
Right.
I believe all sci-fi writers are,
Mm-hmm.
as Mary Shelley was a romantic and wrote Frankenstein. So,
Definitely. Yeah.
she was 19. I was just 7 in my in my 70s when I wrote this novel, Awake Forever in a Sweet Unrest.
Yeah, that's quite a data point there, that she was only 19 that she wrote that. That's incredible. So
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
yeah.
It's And of course, I've studied these people assiduously, so I know the circumstances in which the novel arose for her.
Right.
But it wasn't inspired by Shelley or Byron or a third guy, Pollinari, who wrote the first vampire novel, interestingly, and fell in love with Mary Shelley. But Mary is way more dedicated lover than Shelley himself was.
Right. Definitely. Well, I actually just finished reading it right before we started here, so it's very fresh in my mind. So
Okay, so you're more familiar with the book now.
Oh yeah, completely. I read
it's a page turner, even though it's written to be a page turner, and I had fun doing that, and that was a real good experience for me. And because these guys, as I learned more and more about them, were very interesting guys. Byron was the first international celebrity. Everybody knew who he was, and everybody read his work, Childe Harold and Don Juan. And if he wrote it, he sent it off from Italy because he was banished from England for promiscuity, for lack of a better word. We wouldn't consider it promiscuous now. And they published that work, and it's fun work. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I did all this research, and I researched for years.
Right.
Right. I was inspired in 2011 by reading Blake, London, where I was teaching at Imperial College, and coming off radiation for cancer and
Wow.
worried about that. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and the apartment had a wonderful bay window that looked out onto the street, and you could watch the double-decker buses going by. And I drank a glass of port and took an Ativan and read Blake. So I learned something, say, from the 60s. But and he really, really, really turned me on, and I increasingly started to read the Romantics. And my life partner and true love, the poet Gail Ronsky, said, "You want to read the Romantics? Here." And she went up into her office above our cabin here in Topanga, and brought down all of Byron and Shelley and Keats. And I was already familiar with Frankenstein, and I started reading them and reading them and reading them. And then I read the biographies are all very long. Some of them 800 pages. I read all their biographies, and I read biographies of Coleridge and Wordsworth as well. And I read William Hazlitt, who was the first, I guess, essayist. So that period was so rich. And I thought, geez, I'm going to write a book like that about this. What am I going to do? Because so that's when I invented my character, Beatrice, who I originally thought would be a in her late 20s, but I realized that she couldn't encounter these people. She had to be more of a tabula rasa, right? At the
Mm-hmm.
go in there. So she's a high school dropout at 19, dropped out during the pandemic, lives in a little hutch behind her parents. Um, and I knew something about it. My daughter dropped out of high school at age 16
Mm.
and ended up doing quite well for herself. So it can be done. So and she takes a job, right, as an intern at Beyond Baroque, the Center of Poetry in Los Angeles. I think it really is. Only it's non-paying, and she has to go down to a cellar basement and catalog what's in this newly discovered cellar basement, except nothing, no electronics or mechanics work down there. This is a Gothic novel, right? Can't send an innocent girl into someplace with any equipment. She's got to be unarmed. So she encounters Mary Shelley, and um,
Yeah.
off we go.
Right. Well, it's funny because it kind of reminds me the plot a little bit of, did you ever see that Woody Allen movie, Midnight in Paris?
Yeah,
Yeah, it reminds
yeah.
me
In
of that
fact,
a
yeah.
lot.
In fact, a number of people have said it to me, and I did see that, and I liked it. But you know, I like Woody Allen, and he's smart.
Hmm.
Whatever his faults, I know he's
Well, not so much in his
oversimplified.
personal life, but
But
yes, I agree. I love his movies. So.
uh, um, but it's yeah, it's more like that than say Gump. It's more like Woody Allen. It's
Yeah,
movie, and so that's right. That's an interesting movie, and he doesn't worry about time travel, and I don't either.
right. Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't actually care how the thing works. You know what I mean? Like I don't need to know, what the mechanics are of why this is happening or how this is happening. Just if it's happening, all right, I'm in. Whatever we're doing here, I'm in. So,
yeah. I mean, it's your craft, it's your skill. I don't have any trouble moving from the 21st century to the early 18th century. And people are people, and young, passionate people are young, passionate people. And this crowd at this time is young and passionate. They're in their early 20s. Um, and Beatrice is 19. And each occasion with these poets is potentially romantic.
hmm.
So that's one tension to let you know what's happening next. She travels back or travels to them, as they say. They think she's haunting them. Um, she thinks she's seeing ghosts, and uh, and experiences them in right two trips basically, two with Keats and two with Shelley and two with Byron, and then finally I go back again. Yeah, at, at 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 the point of the climax of the book, she travels back for Shelley's cremation, uh,
Hmm.
and I picked up so much respect for these characters that I got to know them. I wrote the book with their poems at my feet, and if I needed to get inspired, I could just pick up their poems. Um,
Hmm.
and, they're really interesting, inspiring people. They're the rock stars of the early 19th century.
Right.
Always
Absolutely.
people get confused. I taught for years. Our students could never get that 19th, 18th. They could never get the centuries right.
But how did you find writing? And I haven't read your other books yet, but
Well, there's a lot of them, so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
okay.
Sorry, I haven't gotten to that. I haven't gotten there yet, but I will. But you obviously are not a young woman, and I would think it would be a little bit of a challenge to write a main character that is so different from yourself. Did you find that challenging? And if so, what were the challenging parts of that?
I had, I had no difficulty. One, I'm very good at characterization and dialogue, and and I say that with confidence. I
Hmm.
don't not with braggadocio, and I enjoy doing it. So I enjoy entering the minds of these characters, and I entered their lives, and I read all of their biographies, and I kind of pinpointed where I wanted to talk about them. So, and I've taught for 35 years. I've taught 19-year-old young women, um, mostly Catholics, because I was at a Jesuit university, and I know and I read their essays and their poems and their stories. So I know well their concerns about love, love, and pregnancy and what they want to do with their lives and what they're afraid of. And certainly these are times where everybody's afraid, but I know college kids are extremely afraid for the future.
Hmm.
And she's not well read, but she's not illiterate. She's smart. Her parents are ex-professors, retired professors. And of course, she responds to them the way my daughter responded to her parents, who were college professors. She didn't read anything. Um, no, she ended up getting a master's degree in performance art in Australia. But she at the time, right? So I knew who that person was. I wasn't worried. I didn't want to psychoanalyze her. I
Hmm.
wanted her to enter these events and discover and discover. And discovery is one of the major themes, right, of this book, because as she discovers, we discover, and we participate in that discovery. And she doesn't know what's coming next. And I think the reader doesn't know either. This is oddly, without being a suspense novel, it is a ghost story. And what's going to happen next is a really becomes really enticing. But it took some time. This was not a book. I've sat down and written a book in 9 weeks sometimes, but this took quite some time. It took years of research, starting in 2011 till 2020, 2021, when I decided to start writing. And it still I had to think about what these people were going to do, but I kind of understood what they could say, and also I had their poetry in front of me, and much of their what they say is paraphrased from what they wrote.
Hmm.
So I didn't have trouble. I wasn't intimidated by them. I was kind of wild about it. It was a discovery for me too, um, and that I think that metaphor of discovery, and also, of course, the metaphor of reading. What happens when you enter a book? And there's people already out there writing about this book and talking about it in that it's really about entering a book and what happens when you enter a book, and the book itself is a metaphor for entering the reality of a book and having it take over um, your life for a moment of time. And certainly when I write a novel, that's the most enjoyable thing,
Mm.
is to have that enter that reality. And the deeper you get into the novel, the more you spend time living with those people you're writing about, and them saying surprising things, and you spend hours thinking about what they're thinking or saying, and it never gets to the page. Then you get, and you keep absorbing it, and letting it take over your physique and your mind, and it comes out your hands. You write it, and that was a lot of fun. And I wrote it in pencil
Mm.
on a pad, and it was much longer in pencil on a pad. But when it got to the typewriter or the computer, it was thank God for computers, because you move things around. So there are scenes
Yeah.
in that book that I changed where they end, where they came and where they ended up. Um, but I love spending the time there.
Good.
And when I got done, I said, "Yep, I did it." Written a lot of books, but this one felt really, really good. It really is engaging and entertaining, and uh, and without lecturing at all, it teaches and introduces, right, people to the Romantic poets who are 200 years ago. That's a long time. They were talking about the Napoleonic Wars just ended, right?
Hmm.
And and this crowd was supported Napoleon because
Hmm.
they hated royalty. They were radical thinkers. They were against the colonization of America. They were radical thinkers, as Beatrice's parents once were, right, during their years in Vietnam.
Hmm.
Um, so that's
Right.
fun to do, those connections,
Hmm. But
and all.
it's
Yeah.
it's a fairly short book, which I'm not, that's not a complaint at all. I actually, the older I get, if I see a movie is like 2 hours long, I'm like, could we shave about a half an hour off of this? Good then.
Don't you, that happens a lot, and it's not just Hollywood, it's the Europeans too.
Oh,
You say,
100%.
you could have stopped there. But
Exactly. So I like a shorter piece of media. I'm fine with that. But did you have a kind of length that you were going for when you started writing this book, or how did you kind of settle on how long this ended up being?
I just wrote till it ended.
Ah, okay.
I let it emerge from me. It emerged slowly, but I let it emerge. And when it ended, I changed the ending. I don't know how fair it is to evoke that, but when she's standing in front of the bulldozer and the Frankenstein monster is driving it, right? I I was kind of ending it there, and then I didn't, and then I took her to Shelley's cremation instead, and then I let the Frankenstein monster reappear. So that all changed, um, and then it was over. Here came the swan, and it was which is a major symbol in the book, the heart and the swan and the romantics, right? Imagination and the heart,
Hmm.
and those are the things that lift as Keats would say, lift the veil from reality so you can see the truth and beauty underneath. I felt it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not that kind of plotting writer. I don't set the plot and then try to meet those points. I mean, I've written some screenplays with not never made it to the movies, but they got some attention. So I learned that. I learned that I don't write that. I don't write to that. I let these characters, powerful characters, have these powerful characters take over
Hmm.
and write that book for you. And I do that. That's what I do. And Henry James is the one that talked up that idea, that characters. He turned their Aristotle upside down and said characters first. Yeah, not plot. And I agree with that. I think that they make things happen, and their depth makes things happen, and they come to scenes with things they need to say. So everything is at stake all the time in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. So I didn't plan it to be short. In fact, I thought it was a lot longer than it was. But when I got the proofs, there it was, 89 pages. So, okay. Now, I spoke with someone last night for the first time who said, I don't know, maybe you should have explained more. But I had a very good professor back at the Utah, Francois Camoin, who once said to me, never explain, never explain. And that comes out of the era in which I was in school with when Ray Carver, right, that whole Iowa minimalist thing where you just show it, show it. Don't tell people what to think, show it.
That's
And
always good writing advice, definitely. Um,
yeah.
but you've written poetry and prose. What do you find easier and harder about each, and what kind of mood do you find that moves you to do you choose one type of writing over the other, I guess?
Well, one, in fact, I'm not a poet at all.
Oh, okay.
In my Trotsky and Callow book, I have one poem that Trotsky's lover on the train, the Iron Train, says to him, but I'm not a poet. I'm not a biographer. I'm not a historian. I'm not a poet.
Hmm.
I think it was a big advantage for me and fascinating. Yesterday, when I read last night, I would say in that audience, I would say three-quarters of the people I saw out there were poets. They were poets.
Hmm.
So I aspire to be poetic and obviously to be lyrical.
Hmm.
And so I think this book is beautifully written, but I aspire to that. Um, so I'm not a poet, so I don't have to choose to not write poetry or to write prose instead of poetry.
Well, I guess
I
I just like you said, your writing does have a kind of lyrical lilt to it, I guess. So I guess just kind of assumed that you had and also there's poets that are characters in the story too. So.
yeah, well, but they're fantastic. I love poetry. The book is dedicated to poetry. Coleridge is in this book too. He's living in a tent on Venice Beach, or a guy that thinks he's Coleridge, and he takes her on a spirited flight to Xanadu. Um, so I learned I learned more and more about reading poetry by reading these guys, so to speak, right? Because they're young men, and so I can read poetry better now, but so I know a lot of poets and I respect them, and now I see have a little more insight into what inspires them, and um, but I don't think it's too. I've lived with a poet for many years, and now a pretty well-known poet here in Los Angeles, Gail Ronsky, um, but I don't have. Uh, write a poem. Which is okay, because I can name any number of fiction writers. I know that. I guess who pulled that? Not Conrad, but anyway, fiction writers that have turned to poetry, and I don't know how successfully Bukowski
Mm.
uh, or Carver uh, turned that corner.
Mm.
Uh, but I just get across the street.
Well,
I
definitely.
don't try to turn that corner.
Yeah, 100%. Well, what are you working on for your next book? I assume you're gonna have another book coming.
Yeah, yeah. Although this book this is the first book I've tried to promote.
Ah,
So
okay.
over all these years, I just felt so good about it. I said, okay, let's try to get it some attention. So that's why I'm talking to you
Gotcha.
today. But and and this is the first oral interview I've had. I guess I've got a bunch of them lined up, but now. But um, I tried to write a book about what it was like in my family before I was 12, and I had some pretty traumatic things happen at that point. But and I got about 50 pages in, and that's what I give myself, and said, nope, nope. So now I've been researching George Sand, who wrote 80 novels, and
Mhm.
25 plays. And she spent 9 years as Chopin's lover
Hmm.
and 8 years with Flaubert in a rather ambiguous relationship. And meanwhile, had relationships with any number of men and women while she did that. So I said, well, so I got fascinated with that. And I'm reading Sand. I've read all of Flaubert. I've got a bunch of Chopin. Um, and Delacroix was the painter of the period, did her portrait, and he was her lover. Lots of people were. It's just fascinating how she, it seems like the more genius the person was, the more they fell in love with George Sand. So I'm fascinated with that now. And I'm reading a long narrative poem written in 1516 called Orlando Furiosa. And that's giving me some ideas now. Because I do like fantasy, and that book is full of unicorns and flying horses and demons and okay, but I'm waiting for something to emerge, but that's where I'm spending my time when I'm now. So I'm not writing, which is unusual for me because
Mm.
generally I write every day and making progress. But I'm spending time promoting this book and reading that stuff. So that's where I am now, among other things. I have books all around my house. I just so wherever I sit, there's a book there, and I can pick it up and read it. So I'm not a techno reactionary, but I'm not a aficionado either. I don't
Yeah.
spend time there.
Right.
See someone like my daughter, who's a performer in Sydney, Australia, is knows all that technology. She
Mm.
can just by the touch of her hands, just can do it all. So I'm not good at it. I don't turn and yeah, I like books. It's
Well,
okay.
yeah. I was going to ask you what books you've been reading lately. What were some of your favorites?
Well, I'm reading Sans Gabrielle, which is about a young woman who's brought up as a man and doesn't discover till she's 17 that she's a man. That's kind of a odd thing, impossible thing to right. And I'm reading Orlando Furioso, and I'm reading Virginia Woolf's diaries because I read all of Virginia Woolf's. I don't know, and I'm reading Proust. I've been reading Proust now for years. I read
Mm.
a, I read a couple of pages a day. You know, I don't have to finish it if I die before.
I was going to say that
And I don't finish Proust,
that's
and
one of those bucket bucket
he's
list.
kind of good.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
um, and I probably reading something else. I like to keep up with science. I read astronomy and Scientific American, and I'm be pretty eclectic. And I just finished the first novel of a guy I think named Corey, who wrote the TV uh, serial Enhance is based on.
I don't
And,
know.
my daughter or child's current lover gave me that book and said, "Well, try this," and so I did, and that's yeah, it was okay. I like to keep up. I like to know who's doing what.
Right.
Uh, it turns out I was at Davis when Stanley Robinson, who wrote all that Mars stuff, was. I didn't even know. We didn't even know each other,
Wow.
but I've read a lot of his work because he had wonderful research on terraforming Mars, and I read a lot about terraforming Mars, and he really brought that all together. He knew all that stuff. So sci-fi is pretty rich. I like it. Um, to the imagination
Hmm.
and and the ideas. Uh,
Who were
but
some
I'm
of the
I'm
first
cautious. I'm cautious.
sci-fi writers that you got turned on to when you were a kid?
That excuse me, what
Oh,
that
I was asking who your favorite sci-fi authors were when you were growing up. Who
um well, I did the basics. I did the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Jules Verne. And I liked or well, you caught me here in a blank, but War of the Worlds.
of course, yeah,
That's a pretty good. I know those guys are pretty good writers. Stanislav Lem, which I re didn't read until like a few years ago, and he wrote the novel Solaris.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
like
and
a lot.
yeah, the Russian movie is astounding. The American movie, has a happy ending, but
Yeah. You didn't like the
but
Clooney version?
so I like Lem a lot, and and Vonnegut, who even
Yep.
influenced a little bit the style of this book. My humor comes out of Twain and Vonnegut,
Hmm.
and he has a ghost story, Galapagos, where the narrator is a ghost. So that kind of the spareness a little bit of this book springs from Vonnegut, and
Yep.
yeah, so and boy, he drank a lot. He
You
could,
want
couldn't
it?
get through a reading, but
That's funny.
but
Yeah, no,
a
I
good mind. No, so did Poe. The name of Coleridge. I mean,
right.
these people weren't weren't taking it easy on their consciousness. It's bad.
Well, definitely. I'm originally from southern Indiana. I live now outside of Indianapolis. So yeah, I've been reading
Yeah,
like it.
Terre Haute, Larry Bird,
Yeah.
Southern Indiana. Yeah,
That's
I was born on Lake Erie,
oh neat. Okay, cool.
so I'm not so bothered by the heat of California because I was learned to despise the ice and snow.
Mm,
Respect it. It's very romantic, but it's it's cold.
yeah, it's no
But
joke.
I born in the Mideast, I guess they call it now. I think probably Indiana is too. I'm at Midwest anymore. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of right in the middle there. Yeah, I always refer to at least southern Indiana as the northernmost southern state because it's
well, I've
it's
been there,
got
or
that.
like what Cairo, Illinois. That
What's that?
I don't know. That feels south to me.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
But so and Southern Ohio. I think there are things in Southern New Jersey. I mean, there's some real
Oh yeah.
places that have that lingering southernness
Yep.
to them. I love to travel. I've traveled across this country and on motorcycle and cars, but with my thumb, lots of different ways, and just love this. It's a great. So I was fascinated. There's another romantic Kerouac, and that
Mhm.
love of the romantic America. I've I love it, and I've been all around. And I know there's lots of tension. I know in the South, but there's things about the South that are so mysterious and so rich. Um,
Mhm.
but well, as you know, you're in Southern Indiana, so there's some.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I think we're getting close to the end here, from what I see on the Zoom. But is there
Okay.
anything else about this book in particular that we didn't talk about that you think is important for people to know?
Oh, I think about the book itself. I
Sure.
think that it's really that these characters are highly driven and interesting, and they're really not just thoughtful, contemplative people, but people of action, and they're driven, and they're spiritual, if not religious. And I think if you pick this book up, you won't put it down. You'll read this book, and it's not that long. You can sit down and read it. So that's kind of what I feel and what I'd like to communicate. I think that this is an enjoyable read. It's not, scholarly. It's not a hoity-toity. It's got its feet on the ground. And Beatrice is the main character, is a wonderful character of discovering herself and becoming an adult. And what a place to become it amid the romantic poets in the early 19th century.
Right, definitely. Well, thank you for taking all this time to talk to me here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I definitely enjoyed reading it, and it's a quick read, like you said. So yeah, it's not too much of a commitment for sure.
Right.
So I enjoyed that. But one question I do ask before we go though is, what music have you been listening to lately?
What I've become, I'm sorry.
What music have you been listening to lately?
I hate to say it but Coltrane, Miles Davis,
Why do you hate to say that? That's a good answer.
yeah, uh, Bill Evans,
Nice.
Stanley Kachowski, Stan Getz, the
Mm.
early stuff. So I like that. I don't go back. I'm romantic myself, and I get nostalgic, and my era of music. Sometimes the lyrics uh, take me back places I don't really want to go. So I like jazz, and that's there's wonderful, complicated stuff there. Who else? Oscar Peterson. I just got into the jazz maybe about 10 years ago and just started eating it up. And that's what I listen to. And I sit around with my true love and we talk about each other's work and listen to jazz and make eyes at each other.
Well, I think that's what you're supposed to do. So
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thank you again. And yeah, you're welcome to come back anytime, whenever you have something else to talk about. Good luck
Okay.
with,
Thank you for having me. I'm glad that I got to do this with you.
yes. Yeah, it's been a good time. So yeah, anytime you want to talk about something you've written, I'd be glad to read any of your other how many books? 14 other books.
14 other novels.
There you go.
I would say Elena of the Stars would be the
Okay,
next place to go.
cool. I'll check it
So,
out.
and
Awesome.
that's a shorter one too, but it's pretty beautiful.
Great.
Okay.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you again, and
Rob, thank you.
Your heart I must win.